From out of the depths of my soul, there arises a certain fear. What if I should die within the next year? Life for me has just begun. All my dreams would be unfulfilled. All my work left undone. All my goals unreached. My life would have been in vain. Someone will want to publish these when I'm dead. Beverly DeRose once remarked to her younger sister Carol of her poetry. Beverly wrote poems like this compulsively, so much so that for Christmas that year, her father gifted her a beautiful journal, just 3 days before her life was taken from her in a crime that remains unsolved. Garfield Heights in 1964 was your typical blue-collar, working-class neighborhood. And for Beverly DeRose, a Catholic teenager who attended Marymount High School, it was a safe and comfortable place to grow up. Before we talk about Beverly's murder, let's talk about Beverly. She was a sensitive, artistic girl. One of her favorite things to do was stroll around the Cleveland Museum of Art. In the summertime, she would read books for hours in the backyard of her home. She volunteered at Marymount Hospital and considered becoming an English teacher. At the school she attended, she was well-liked and popular. She also had many male admirers. At the time of her death, she had been dating a boy named Roger McNamara, a college student and a devout Catholic. Before Roger, however, Beverly was involved with a boy named Dan Schulte, a typical bad boy. Not much is known about the nature of their relationship, how long it lasted, or on what terms it ended. However, Dan was about to become a suspect in Beverly's murder. There is more than sufficient evidence to suggest in the months prior to her murder, Beverly was being stalked. First, there came the phone calls. The Jaroses began receiving suspicious hang-up calls, sometimes over a dozen a day, according to Beverly's mother and sister. Then there was the night that Beverly's father, coming home from work, caught a glimpse of someone standing on the lawn, gazing at the window of the bedroom Beverly shared with her sister. Allegedly, Beverly's father chased the stranger down the street and was unable to catch them. Another event that made an impression on Beverly occurred in the summer of 1964. A gift placed near the back door of the Jaroses' home labeled "To Bev." In a package from Higbee's was a silver bracelet and ring set. The paranoia had sunk in. From then on, Bev was jumpy. She became anxious about all the doors in the house being locked and would call her family to check in whenever she went anywhere. It was also around this time that Beverly made an odd purchase, an ornate letter opener which she placed on her desktop just in case. On the 28th of December, 1964, Beverly made plans with her friend Barb to visit a mutual friend, Margie. She never made it to Margie's house. 9 a.m., the day begins mundanely. Beverly and her sister Carol do some chores. 10:15 a.m., Beverly and Carol walk to Woolworth's to buy a hairnet for their grandmother, then to Huff Bakery to buy bread. 10:45 a.m., the sisters walk to their grandmother's house for lunch. While there, Beverly tells her grandmother that she can't stay long because her friend Barb is coming by around 12:30. Beverly's grandmother's neighbor, a young man named James Monsalewski, drives Beverly home. Carol stays at their grandmother's house. 1 p.m. At home, Beverly calls her mother, who is at work. She reminds her mother that Barb was going to be here any minute and that she had to change her clothes. There was another event that occurred, though we don't have a timestamp for it. Beverly received another call. In a note written to her father that she'd placed by the phone, she'd written, "Stephen Stakowitz called. We'll call back later." The problem was that Beverly's father didn't know a Stephen Stakowitz. In fact, it's quite likely that Stephen was a fabrication, and perhaps the person who was responsible for all the hang-up calls, checking to see if Beverly was home alone. 1:20 p.m. Barb's mother drops her off at the Jaroses. Barb goes around to the storm door, which is usually how she enters the home. The door is locked, but she notices that the inner door that leads to the kitchen is open, which she thinks is strange, since Beverly is so adamant about keeping the doors locked at all times. She also hears the radio blaring classical music. Then she hears a loud thump from upstairs. The sound, which she later would describe as somebody opening a dresser drawer loudly. On the front porch, Barb waits for Beverly for about 20 minutes. When Bev doesn't come outside, Barb assumes that Bev is mad at her and then heads home. 3:45 p.m. Margie calls Barb annoyed. She and Beverly were supposed to have been at her house hours ago. Barb explains that Beverly stood her up, which Margie thinks is odd. Margie calls Beverly's grandmother to check if she's there. Beverly's grandmother confirms that Beverly left the house a little after noon. Now worried, Beverly's grandmother calls the Jaroses' home, where no one picks up the phone. She calls Beverly's father at work to tell him that Beverly is missing. Beverly's father rushes home. The side storm door is now unlocked. When he walks into the house, the radio is still blaring. Panicking, he runs upstairs to his daughter's room and finds Beverly on the floor by her bed, face down in a pool of her own blood. Before we move on to the damage done to Beverly's body, we must look at the timeline. It's likely that the attack occurred between the phone calls and just after Barb's arrival, which means that the killer was most likely inside the Jarosz home while Barb was on the porch waiting for Beverly to emerge. This is how Beverly was found. Slacks and underwear pulled down, blouse and bra tucked up, exposing her breasts. More than 40 stab wounds littering her back and neck. Taut around her neck was a rope, later reported to be either a clothesline or a window sash. Though her stab wounds appeared fatal, her death was strangulation. Autopsy reports confirm that a rape did not occur, though the scene was possibly staged as a sexual assault. We also know that Beverly did not go without a fight. The plaster of the slanted ceiling near Beverly's bed was smashed in, and clumps of her hair were found in the bushes behind the house. It's likely that her killer did not escape without a few injuries of their own. Most have posited that Beverly must have known the murderer personally to let them inside the house when she was alone and into her bedroom. The only DNA evidence found in the bedroom were fingerprints, which didn't match Beverly's family members or close friends. The weapon used to make the stab wounds has never been confirmed, though several sources assume that the weapon was a knife. It's more likely that the weapon was one Beverly already had at hand. The letter opener on her desk, which was missing from Beverly's room. The Garfield Heights police were convinced that not only was the killer definitely a man, he was one of the long list of Beverly's apparently rejected love interests. I think that's ridiculous. Though Beverly's murder might point towards a male culprit, no female suspects have been considered. Though it might only be a slim possibility, there's a chance that Beverly's murderer was in fact female. She might have distracted the authorities by posing Beverly's murder as sexually motivated and might have known that the police would never imagine that a girl could commit such acts of violence. Additionally, if Beverly trusted her killer enough to let them inside her home and up to her room, a female murderer would make more sense. Among the men who were accused, none were convicted. James, the neighbor who drove Beverly home the day she was murdered, was questioned but had returned straight home after dropping Beverly off and to the house after her body was found. Dan, who was in town for Christmas, provided proof to the police that he had been on the clock at his job during that time. Roger, Beverly's boyfriend at the time of her death, said he was homesick that day. Today, Roger is still a resident of Northeast Ohio. When approached by journalists and authors, he has declined to comment on reopening Beverly's case. Dan left the U.S. in 2005 and is suspected to be living in Israel. In 2016, however, a Daniel J. Schulte bought a flower and wrote a comment on Beverly's Find a Grave page. Also on Beverly's Find a Grave memorial page is a series of odd comments left throughout 2019 and 2020 by William Burr. Beverly Ann, maybe when I die, the good Lord will let us talk some. I have a few things I want to tell you, starting with I'm sorry for my part. Hello, darling. I thought I'd say hello. Summer is coming soon. I'll bring you fresh flowers. Your other love died, Dan Schulte. Maybe you talked to him already. Beverly, I was your first love. I'll always remember you as my special girl. Love you. Whether they are the handiwork of a prankster or a genuine person from Beverly's past, the comments leave an unsettling aftertaste to Beverly's still unsolved murder. Beverly loved poetry, so I will leave you with a poem that I think she would have liked. This is by Lord Byron. But I have lived, and not lived in vain. My mind may lose its force, my blood its fire, and my frame perish even in conquering pain. But there is that within me which shall tire, torture in time, and breathe when I expire. Something unearthly, which they deem not of, like the remembered tone of a mute lyre, shall on their softened spirits sink and move in hearts all rocky now, the late remorse of love. Beverly's sister Carol, who's still alive, once related a dream she had about Beverly. She was in the Canton area with her, and she thought she'd lost her, and thought, I'll never see her again. But then she turned the corner, and there she was.